1918, in Texas, the nation is managing the Spanish influenza pandemic. In the Second Great War is going on. A youthful Pearl, Mia Goth, moves alone in her room before her oppressive mother Ruth, Dandy Wright, comes in and orders her to quit playing and take care of her tasks. Pearl additionally needs to really focus on her paraplegic dad, Matthew Sunderland. Pearl goes to the stable to watch out for the cows and ponies. A goose meanders into the horse shelter, and Pearl pierces it with a pitchfork. She then goes to the lake, where she tracks down the gator Theta and hands it to her as a bite. Pearl fantasizes getting off the ranch and has yearnings for fame. She is hitched to Howard, Alistair Sewell, who is serving in the conflict. Ruth deters Pearl's desires and believes her should remain where she is. Pearl rides her bicycle into town and heads out to the cinema. Thereafter, she meets an enchanting and attractive projectionist, David Corenswet. She informs him a little concerning herself, and he gives her a scrap of the film reel, which he says he can join back together. Pearl finds herself stricken with the man. As she rides her bicycle back home, the piece flies out of her pocket, and loses all sense of direction in a cornfield. Pearl wildly searches for it yet winds up going over a scarecrow. She ascends and chops it down, then, at that point, begins kissing it and riding it, imagining it is the projectionist. She then, at that point, shouts at it and says she is hitched. The homestead is visited by Pearl's rich sister by marriage Mitzi, Emma Jenkins Purrow, and her mom, who conveys a nursing pig to Ruth, yet she roughly leaves it outside since she doesn't need good cause. Mitzi lets Pearl know that her congregation is holding tries out for a voyaging company, which Ruth sees as her ticket off the ranch. Later on, Pearl eats with her folks, and Ruth keeps on counseling her little girl and deal with her like she is careless. Pearl likewise thinks about taking her dad's life to end the wait for every one of them. Pearl gets back to the theater and meets with the projectionist once more. He shows her an unreleased film, A Complimentary Lift, one of the world's most memorable obscene movies. The projectionist says that these sorts of movies will alter the business. Pearl discusses her fantasies and aspirations yet specifies that she is kept down by her folks, and she neglects it that she wishes they were dead. However, she backtracks. The projectionist urges Pearl to follow her fantasies. During supper, Ruth takes out a flyer she found from Pearl, realizing that she needs to try out for the company. By and by, Ruth closes down Pearl's fantasies, deploring the way in which she had to really focus on her significant other on account of his condition, and furthermore let Pearl know that no one will have her since she realizes that Pearl has wiped out propensities like killing little creatures. The two get into a warmed contention, with Pearl shouting at Ruth, and they slap one another. Pearl battles and pushes Ruth toward the chimney, making her burst into flames and disintegrate. Pearl tosses bubbling water onto her to put the fire out and afterward hauls a scarcely alive Ruth to the storm cellar. Pearl then, at that point, surges back to the theater and falls asleep with the projectionist. The following day, Pearl is set to prepare for her tryout. The projectionist drives her home and goes over the wreck in the kitchen, as well as Pearl's dad sitting alone. He hears a pounding sound. Ruth in the storm cellar, which Pearl says is her canine. She takes him around back to the stable, where she neglects it that she doesn't have a canine. The projectionist develops more anxious and attempts to respectfully tell Pearl he needs to go. However, she starts to become irate and accepts he is dismissing her and won't remove her from the ranch. As the projectionist attempts to leave, Pearl gets a pitchfork and pierces him 2 times, permitting his vehicle to move into the lake where Theta devours his body. Pearl then, at that point, thumps Ruth down the steps and goes to cover her dad with a cover. Pearl wears a red dress and joins Mitzi at the tryout, where they see one young lady crying about her dismissal. Pearl happens before Mitzi, and she puts on her own dance standard, set across her imagined stage creation in a conflict setting. After she gets done, the adjudicators reject her. Pearl imagines the adjudicators as her folks, in addition to the projectionist and Howard, before she asks for one more opportunity and demands that she has the stuff. However, one of the appointed authorities tells her that they are searching for somebody more youthful, blonde, and with X variable. Pearl starts to howl madly and separate, crying outside before Mitzi goes to comfort her. Mitzi accompanies Pearl home and sees the decaying pig outside being eaten up by parasites. They plunk down in the kitchen, and Mitzi attempts to quiet Pearl somewhere around, having her vent and talk like she is tending to Howard. Pearl then, at that point, conveys an energetic discourse about her hatred for Howard for leaving for the conflict, as she probably was aware he came from some place far away and could possibly remove her from the ranch. She go on by owning up to her undertaking with the projectionist and admits to eliminating her folks and the projectionist. However, she says she laments doing it to her dad. After she gets done, Mitzi begins to leave, and Pearl attempts to salute her for getting the part. Mitzi denies getting the part, yet Pearl says she is lying. Mitzi then, at that point, says she did so she can leave. As she begins to leave, Pearl follows and snatches a hatchet. Mitzi attempts to run and call for help, yet Pearl hacks her to death. Pearl dissects Mitzi and takes care of her remaining parts to Theta. She then goes to the cellar, where Ruth had endeavored to slither up the steps prior to kicking the bucket. Pearl imagines Ruth looking great and telling her that she cherishes her, which is all she needed from her. Pearl then, at that point, sits her folks' carcasses in the lounge area, alongside the spoiled pig, and professes to eat with them. Howard gets back from the conflict and goes into the house, where he finds the stunning showcase. Pearl then, at that point, emerges and says she is glad to see Howard. She then gives him a constrained, tormented grin, which she holds through the credits as tears stream down her face.